years.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Thursday, February 6th. Our agenda for the Hingham Board of Selectmen's meeting this evening is called to order. We'll have a public hearing on an application of Herb Chambers Lexus for a Class 1 car dealer's license. We'll have Crow's Landing Entertainment license, a hearing on that. We'll then have 5 warrant articles to consider for deliberation. And the most important part of the evening will be at 7:30 with a joint session between the Board of Selectmen, among the Board of Selectmen, the Advisory Committee, and the School Committee to hear their recommendations on next year's proposed school budget. After that meeting, we will adjourn to executive session for the purpose of discussing strategy with regard to real estate negotiations, because discussion in open session may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the town. I understand a couple of us have not had a chance to read the minutes, so I'll delay that till next week and begin the session with a proposed hearing on the application of Herb Chambers Lexus car dealership.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
For the record, Frank Marinelli. I'm an attorney for Herb Chambers.
Yes, sir.
And Herb Chambers Companies. My office is at 439 Washington Street in Braintree. With me this evening is Mike Schaffman, who is the general manager of Herb Chambers Lexus of Sharon, and Mike will be the general manager of Herb Chambers Lexus of Hingham. Also here is Tim McGrath of my office, and Jim Bristol, who is the seller of the property to the Chambers entity, and also Carl Erickson of Bristol Development.
Okay, Jim, nice to have you back.
Nice to see you guys.
May I approach him?
Please. Sure. Is there a way we can see these at home, Ted?
I don't know if we have the same capabilities.
Okay, yeah. I have to ask the TV. This is not our normal meeting room. Let's see. Is that, I think if we can, excuse me, cameraman, yes, can you get that, those charts on the easels, one at the appropriate time? Look, okay, this is not PBS, but it's close. It's getting there. Okay, very good, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we appear this evening for the board's consideration of the issuance of the Class 1 license for Herb Chambers Lexus of Hingham at 141 Derby Street, and I respectfully submit to the board that the inquiry under the Chapter 140, Section 58 statute is, first of all, is it a qualified applicant, and I would respectfully submit to you that Herb Chambers is certainly a reputable and well-established organization over the past 27 years. Herb started his first dealership and has grown the business to 50 dealerships, employing over 2,000 people, and consistently cited in the Boston Globe as one of the area's best employers, and also recipient of the J.D. Power Award. So we would submit to you that under qualified applicant, you certainly have a qualified licensee. Mike Schaffman is currently operating as the general manager of the facility in Sharon, and also the Lexus dealership, which is a temporary location in Norwell. The second part of the inquiry would be, is this a proper facility? And we would submit to the board that over the past approximate 18 months, we've dealt with the Bristols. We've had a good relationship with them in negotiating the purchase, the 8.9-acre site that I have up here on the chart. And we've also gone through all of the permitting processes with the boards and commissions of the town, and had a good relationship with the boards, thorough hearings throughout those permit process. We had the Board of Health approval of the septic system in March of 2013, and then we had the Conservation Commission order of conditions in October of 2013, and finally we had the Planning Board site plan approval in October, and we also had the Zoning Board of Appeals special permit for the use in the South Hingham Development Overlay District in November. So all of the permits and approvals are in place as far as the zoning is concerned. This is the facility. The facility is 39,000 square feet approximately. It's about a 30,000 square foot footprint, and then you have a second floor. In the facility, we have, of course, showroom, offices, service, and reception area, parts department. So we would be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, but we would respectfully request approval of the Class 1 license for Herb Chambers Lexus.
Okay. Just for the benefit of the folks at home, when would you plan, if everything goes well, when would this be operational?
We would be...
Plan.
We're just getting started. The Bristols, under their agreement with us, have the site work and the development work, what's called pad-ready obligations to create the pad, and then we would build the building. We would be aiming for the fourth quarter 2014, possibly first quarter 2015. One of the things we have to do, and I would ask that you make it a condition or however you want to, if you were to approve it, is we have a approved location letter from Lexus. We have to get a continuation of the approved location letter from Lexus, and Mike will get that, and we'll get it to the board. So the length of the permit process in the past year, we have to just update that documentation, and we'll get you a copy of that.
Okay, that's very good. We'll try not to make it for Jim's grandchildren, if that's okay. Mr. Healy, would you, you're our planning board expert.
Well, expert's a big word, Bruce, but I thank you for that.
I use it with a little e.
Okay. Frank, I see you've got a lot of inventory parking here.
Yes.
On site. Is the diagram here, is this something that's been previously approved by the planning board and the ZBA?
Yes, it has, Mr. Healy, yes.
Okay.
And we have, we met the zoning on 129 customer and employee spaces, and then I think it's 207 would be inventory.
Okay.
Some of that area that you're looking at also is porous pavement. That was one of the things that we did with the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board to mitigate the amount of impervious surface. So we have some porous pavement, and we also have a system that captures the runoff, rain runoff, and uses it for our irrigation system.
My question is more related to the security of the facility. Due to its proximity to the highway, and I know the previous experience with Best Chevrolet to cars being stolen out of the lot, as well as the nature of a Lexus automobile, is this going to be a heavily cambered site for purposes of protecting it? To what extent would you expect the Hingham Police to involve itself with protecting this lot independently of anything that Lexus would do, or Mr. Chambers?
I'd ask Mike to answer that, probably with reference to what we do in Sharon. Come on.
Exactly. The reference to what we do in Sharon, it's very similar. You know, police make cursory drive-throughs, but we have it heavily videoed, and we have an outside security company that, you know, monitors our security of our building. And depending upon, you know, location, I mean, we're in Sharon, Massachusetts, and we don't have an on-site outside security company, and quite frankly, we've had, you know, I don't even want to say this, we have minimal amounts of theft that we've had. In fact, in 3 years that I've been there, I cannot think of one time we've had a theft of the vehicle or tires or anything to that effect. But we would probably deal with it accordingly in that kind of a manner. I would think our security arrangements in Sharon, in Norwell, or in Hingham rather, would mirror what we do in Sharon.
Okay, I just point that out only because you're literally 500 feet from the highway, and
Right.
once you're on Route 3 going north, you know, you can kiss this
Right.
car goodbye.
Right,
So,
exactly.
Okay,
Well, we'll be due diligent on that.
great, thank you.
Thank you. Irma?
How many jobs will you be bringing?
We have, you know, we forecast when we do our planning potential what we originally expect to have, and we're expecting that we're going to have 41 people in there. We presently opened in Norwell as a temporary site. We have 31 employees there. So I would think that 41 in the startup would be where we would be. I think if rule of thumb of where our planning potential would be, I think it probably would go to 50 to 55 people.
Nice. And you're going to have a full maintenance shop, I assume, which is even
Absolutely.
nicer.
Which is even nicer, exactly.
And do you know how much taxes you're going to be paying us? And thank you in advance.
As much as we can.
Thank you so much.
That was the right answer.
What about the existing location? What's going to happen to that?
You know, we really haven't made a decision on what we're going to do, you know.
She did a nice job rehabbing that, so
Well,
that's,
yeah, I think we really did, you know. It's a very nice facility. We originally bought it, Mr. Chambers bought it thinking that he would be able to put Lexus in there, but the footprint just wasn't big enough. So our intentions there is that we're going to see if there's maybe some smaller franchise that's available that we could eventually put in, or, you know, we'll have to do something else with it. We have no real concrete plans at this point.
one last question.
Sure.
I sat in on the planning board discussion about trees and landscaping. Could you maybe share a little bit of that? And my questions would be, are all these new trees? Because I do see that you're beginning to clear some land.
Right. You would probably have a little picture of that.
We have a landscape plan that itemizes all of the inventory and the vegetation that is going to be planted and new plantings. But we did work pretty extensively with the boards, with the planning board and the zoning board, and had to come back a couple of times to
That's
make
because they
sure.
liked you. Yeah, that's the repeat
I hope that's
performances.
the reason. But we wanted to make sure that, that especially the corner when you come off the expressway that you can see here in the rendering. That's a conceptual rendering, but there was a lot of attention put to the, as you approach from where Paul was talking about the expressway
Yep.
from the west, you're going to see that vantage point right there, that perspective. So. we're
And you
gonna-
are one of the gateways to Hingham.
Correct. And that received a lot of attention over the past few months. And I think that we have a construction and facilities corporate manager. And I remember in February, when we first started this process a year ago, I was at a business council meeting where you spoke, and I was struck by the fact that you said if we don't, in the town, spend $50,000 today to maintain our facilities, we're going to spend tens of thousands more in the years ahead. And we take the same approach with private custodianship. I think that you'd see the Chambers facilities everywhere are well-maintained, and we will do the landscaping that was represented. It is part of the record in the plans. It's on the landscape plans that are part of the planning board hearings and also the zoning board.
Thank you for your attention to that, too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any questions from the public on this proposal?
I'll move that we approve the issuance of a Class 1 seller's agent license to Herb Chambers, Route 1, Inc., DBA Herb Chambers, Lexus of Hingham, 141 Derby Street, for the 2014 year, expiring January 1, 2015.
If I could, do we need to amend it with your suggestion?
I think we would want to get the continuation of the site approval letter on record with the board. So we have no problem with that being a
So
continuing.
if I were to amend the motion to say contingent on the site approval letter from Lexus?
That is
Incorporated?
correct, from the manufacturer, yes.
Okay. Do you have that?
Yep, she's
Sharon?
nodding yes.
You got it? Okay, all right.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you very
We look
much.
forward to
Good
seeing
luck.
you. fellas.
While we're changing, may I recognize somebody in the audience?
Sure.
We have a young man, Aaron Handelman. I want to welcome him, and he is earning his citizenship in the community on his way to life and then on his way to getting his wings to be an eagle.
Good
So
for you.
congratulations and welcome.
Welcome. Nice to have you. Okay. You get an extra tick here for being here and putting up with this. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a Crow's Landing Entertainment license.
Is this the old Bangkok Grill?
Yes,
It is.
and it's very good, by the way.
Is it? Okay, that's
I'll give
good
him
to
a plug. We've been there a couple of times.
Okay, good. Okay. Please.
Mr. Chairman and Board, we're here to apply for an entertainment license at our recently opened establishment, which we opened October 25th. So just about 4 months we've been in operation. As Ms. Lauder said, it's going great so far. We're very happy. Hopefully you guys are as well with everything that we've done, and hopefully we'll continue to do. Similar to some other establishments in town, we are hoping to have the opportunity or the option to do live entertainment a few nights a week. I know I've worked with Sharon in terms of the application and just trying to figure out the best approach to what we would want. And it varies in the sense that we're not 100% sure yet, but having the ability to have a single person or at most 3 people come in on a given night to play for a couple hours, similar to, again, some other establishments in town, I think would add a nice kind of touch to what we're doing and the type of place that we are, and the entertainment offering that we wish to give. And happy to answer any other questions.
Irma, since you've been there?
It's a lovely place, and I would look forward to assuming, and I see we do have a sheet already from the police chief that Sharon was good enough to touch base with our police chief to get his approval.
And the building department, and it would be contingent upon us providing Mike
Yep.
and his staff a plan with how it would lay out. We have 2 particular spots in the restaurant we're contemplating right now, leaning on one whereby it would probably remove 2 seats from our occupancy. We're currently 54. It would bring us down to 52 if that particular area of the restaurant is where we decide to do it. And again, it would probably be similar to, I don't want to mention any other establishments, but 1 to 3 people. There are some local folks in town that currently entertain at some other places that would love to give our place a shot. We've also, we're Monday through Friday from 5 to midnight. I can't think of one Monday through Thursday where we stayed open past 11. So it's a good problem to have. Tumbleweeds start rolling in after the diners leave, and we close up, no reason to be open. So there's been a couple weekend nights where we stayed open, right to 12, but that's typically been a Red Sox game or a Patriots game or whatnot. And in addition to that, we also have 4 TVs that I understand now is going to be part of the process going forward, that those in and of itself will qualify for entertainment license in addition. So it's twofold, I guess. The TVs aspect, which we've had since opening, and then the opportunity. One of the other things, we are open for lunch on Saturday and Sundays from 11 a.m. till midnight, but again, I can't think of a Sunday where we've stayed open past 10 so far. But we're contemplating doing something a little differentiated in town, maybe a jazz or a blues brunch on Sunday. So that would be a 1 or 2, maybe 3 at most, ensemble to play some jazz or blues music on a Sunday brunch. Something a little unique, so.
I'm good.
Good. Paul?
Nothing, just want to give you kudos for your write-up in the Globe recently.
Thank you.
Good press is always good for business. I wish you the best of luck in this location.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for
Thank you.
keeping it vital.
And thank you for being sensitive to the time. That's how you stay welcome in the...
Absolutely.
Irma, would you be kind enough?
Right. I'd make a motion to approve the issuance of an annual entertainment license to Coggeshall Group doing business as Crow's Landing for the following. Number 1 to 3 musicians to perform on any of the following days: Thursday through Saturday from 7 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., Sunday from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., and during Sunday brunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. The doors must be shut during performances. And number 2, 4 small flat-screen televisions, 7 days per week from 11 a.m. to midnight.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Board.
Nice to
Appreciate
have
it.
you.
Thank you very much.
I think we're getting close to the bewitching hour.
I would suggest maybe adjourning for a few minutes while everyone files into the room, and then you can reconvene.
Okay. And we can do these
Put the
others.
warrant articles,
We can do those later.
I would suggest we'll do them in the next meeting,
Yeah.
because you're going to go into executive session at the conclusion of your select.
Okay, we're going to come back, because I do have two things, one of which is the noise bylaw.
We're not coming back.
We aren't, can I say it now, then?
No.
Okay.
No. No, we're on the clock. Okay, we're going to take a temporary, to let the cast, the fourth Roman Legion come in, I think. Okay, we'll be right back.
There's a new draft of the bylaw up.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
What's up on the website?
Is it? Oh, okay.
Yep,
I heard it was.
we're getting there.
Okay. No, I don't know. Betty, what's the seating arrangement?
Three chairs are up here, we're in the peanut gallery.
Oh, I moved. Oh, all right. Just tell me what to do. This is all.
Where can I sit?
Wherever you would like.
That was a nice.
I need mine. is Ray Estes, the chairman of the school committee. So, Ray, would you like to introduce your team? Sure.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg, thank you very much. Good evening, Ray Estes, Chairman of the School Committee. Have with me Dr. Dorothy Gallo, Superintendent of Schools, John Ferris, Director of Business and Support Services, joined by school committee members Dennis Friedman and Ed Schreier, and advisory is here as well. Tonight we review the currently proposed school department budget for fiscal year 2015. With a public hearing scheduled next week and votes by all three boards represented here tonight a number of weeks away, this is still very much a work in progress. Our hope is that in the end we can come to an agreement on a school budget for next year that will provide the quality of services our residents expect and deserve while addressing the growing and evolving needs of our students, all in an affordable and responsible way. The school committee administration began to discuss this budget conceptually last October during its second annual half-day planning session. The results of that meeting provided the direction necessary for the administration to formulate a budget proposal, as you'll hear tonight, that includes and aligns with the school committee's priorities for the delivery of educational services to the children of Hingham. This proposal reflects and reaffirms an approach to budget formulation began last year focusing on needs rather than available revenue as a starting point. Of course, the intention remains that we can meet the needs of our students in a manner that is consistent with affordability. I believe we can. What is encouraging in that regard is that Hingham emerged from the recent recession through sacrifice and prudent management, perhaps financially stronger than ever before, and prospects for the next several years are extremely positive. Our needs-based budget proposal for fiscal 2015 is organized into 4 categories: enrollment-related requests, positions or services related to unique needs and demographic changes, care and maintenance of grounds and facilities, and specific programmatic and service needs. Dr. Gallo and John Ferris will speak to specifics and details in each of these areas. In general, I think it's fair to say that our overall student enrollment continues to grow, and we must provide an appropriate level of staffing to maintain reasonable, if not ideal, class sizes. In addition, the makeup of our student body continues to experience changes in the nature and extent of services required relative to learning, physical, social, and emotional health support needs. It will be increasingly challenging to maintain our grounds and facilities in an acceptable manner, particularly with a new school coming online in a few months and new athletic facilities operational. Focus on counseling and planning for post-secondary experiences is more necessary now than ever, as is attention to technological advances and new standardized curriculum and testing necessary to prepare our kids to excel in the 21st century. Our capital budget request begins to address the technology needs to meet that challenge as we embark on an initiative developed over nearly 2 years of evaluation and refinement. We're very grateful for this opportunity to share our thoughts with you tonight, and we look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Okay. Thank you, Ray, very much. I have the honor and esteemed pleasure to introduce our school superintendent, Dr. Gallo.
Thank you. I hope that you all have a packet. There are some for the audience over there, and any member of the board should have received one from John. So is everyone set with a packet? Some of you have been to many of our budget meetings, so I'll apologize in advance because many of the things you'll see tonight are repetitions, but not all. But in fairness to the audience at home, and hello to everyone who's tuned in, and also to the folks in this room who've not been to prior meetings, we're going to go over some of these slides very quickly because many people have seen them, but we really feel that we need to do a bit of repetition to set the stage. So, we've thought a lot about who we are recently, and perhaps who we aren't. So, who are the Hingham Public Schools? Well, we think that we're a family-centered institution and that we serve an economically and racially and ethnically and educationally diverse population. Nearly 4,300 students, ages 3 to 22, every single school day. We also believe that we're a mandated educational service provider. And we're charged with meeting the needs of 600 students on IEPs, that's a special needs plan, and nearly 200 students with 504 plans, that's a federal civil rights mandate. We're also the town's largest municipal employer, and that involves more than 600 employees, both educators and support staff, most of whom are represented by one of 6 separate collective bargaining units. We also are a recreational services provider for nearly all of our secondary students, 2,200 of them, and a provider of physical and social and emotional and mental health resources that serve many of the district's 2,800 families each day. We're also the caretakers and facilities managers for 10 buildings, 6 schools and 4 properties at the depot, for multiple acres of open space and playing fields, and for the requisite number of roofs and boilers and elevators and thousands of other pieces of individual equipment, any of which can wear out, break down, fall apart, or otherwise fail or need attention on any given day. We're Hingham's version of the MBTA, with 6 big yellow buses and a spare, 20 yellow big buses and a spare, 9 special education vans, several maintenance vehicles, relationships with a number of outside contractors, and all of those facilities transport more than 2,000 students to and from school each day, and to various and sundry other activities that may occur after school in the evening or on weekends. We're Hingham's very own restaurant chain that serves about 1,000 meals to a very discriminating customer base every single day. We're a complex entity that serves not one function, but many different functions, and provides many different services within the town. So if you think about that kind of an entity, what kind of entity really are we? How do we fit into the overall town government? Are we another department of the town? Well, perhaps, but with many differences that do impact the need for resources. Our sheer size, our organizational structure, the extent of stewardship for multiple properties, the many mandated programs and services that we have, and the many budget variables. So are we a department of the town? Or are we a division of the town? More likely, perhaps, with its own assortment of departments, we have some departments which parallel the town's own departments, other departments and their functions. We have business and finance functions, we have recreation programs and resources, we have libraries, we have maintenance and facilities management functions, we have health services, and we have behavior and rules enforcement. And you may say, well, you don't have a police department, but many people think that our assistant principals serve that kind of a function. So we would like you to consider this budget as we present it in the light of that background. Who are we, what do we do, and how do we fit within the town? So Ray mentioned there's a needs-based budget, and I'm not going to read through every one of these slides because you've been over them, but in this one, I think if you look at the 3rd bullet down, a needs-based budget is one where needs are broadly defined, and they encompass responses to enrollment. Everybody understands that, and people tend to think of that in kind of a linear way. More kids, more resources. Fewer kids, we should be able to eliminate some resources. So it's kind of a linear thinking. But we have other kinds of needs that we think this year we've given more attention to in terms of the preparation of the budget. The changing demographic profile that we have, needs that children and families bring to school each day. A backlog of program and service and facilities deficiency. We'll talk a little bit more about that because that's something that we have not focused on over the last several years. And federal and state mandates, school committee priorities, and community expectations. There are some more needs in those areas. There's some background that ought to provide context for our school budget that's unique this year. All of our collective bargaining contracts expire next summer, and there are 6 of them. We do have in the budget, as a result, an allowance, and you'll see that later when we talk about the numbers, that will allow us to bargain in good faith. There are, in the budget, wherever people are mentioned in the budget, we have included any known steps. We've moved everyone ahead a step. And we have included any lane changes that we know of. In other words, if someone is moving to a master's degree or moving to a master's plus 30 credits, those things are included in the budget that you will see. In terms of personnel changes, we think this is going to be a lean year, so to speak, in terms of change. We had last year a total in the end of 17 retirements, 12 full-year leaves of absence. We don't expect that to occur again this year. And in fact, right now, there are only 3 faculty retirements, and we've taken credit for those already in the budget. Budget reflects a replacement in each of those 3 places. We have the 12 people returning from leaves. Those of you who've been to other meetings have heard that. We have some good news stories, however, as well. The circuit breaker funding, that is the state funding for special education, the reimbursement funding, is $383,000 offsetting our budget in the coming year. That's the largest circuit breaker we have had since the inception of the program. And it certainly does reflect the fact that we paid out an additional $533,000 when 2 years ago at this time I had to announce it was that increase to the budget. As well, we have fewer tuitions, out-of-district tuitions for special education that are in this budget. And you should know as well that there's a great deal more focus at the moment on funding for special education, particularly the adequacy of the circuit breaker at the state level, and most of that thinking will result in things that perhaps won't come to fruition this year, but should over the next several years. This slide is not very visible, but most of you have a copy of one that is black that talks about the budget. This is the first time that most of you will have seen the budget, a separate page with the black print, divided into the 3 categories. And the 3 categories that we use are regular education, special education, and vocational education. So you can see the projected, proposed 2014-15 budget in each of those categories, and the bottom line, which is $43,893,585. That's the proposed budget at this point in the process. You can see the percentage change in each of the 3 categories, and the percentage change overall is an increase of 4.92%. Now, we've had some prior discussions about the fact that we have an 8.52% increase in regular education, 5.35% decrease in special education, and also a decrease in vocational education. That's a small amount, but it does reflect that we're budgeting fewer vocational students this year than we have in the past. And I know that's a concern to some folks as to whether or not that kind of a change is sustainable. We talked a bit about that when we had the Saturday meeting. One thing I would like to point out, however, is that if you look at the 8.52% increase in regular education, that does reflect the fact that the allowance that I talked about earlier to allow us to go forward in good faith with collective bargaining, that allowance right now is all sitting in the regular education budget, even though, as it would be paid out, the collective bargaining increase, there are pieces of that would be attributed in the end to the special education budget. So those percentages aren't really reflective, totally reflective. Certainly the increase in regular ed is bigger, but if the allowance were broken up, and we don't break it up for obvious reasons, the percentages would be somewhat different. Our budget is always a net budget, and what that means is that the numbers you see, the bottom line numbers in each of the categories and overall, those numbers assume a certain number of offsets. And typically offsets are in 2 categories. There are offsets that are grants that we receive, and there are offsets that are monies that we can allocate from revolving accounts to support the budget. So you can see all of the offsets on this chart. In special education, if you look at the net spending, special ed line, $9,843,071. That's nearly $1 million has already offset the regular special education budget. And the biggest number there that you will see is the tuition revolving, circuit breaker just above tuition revolving. That's the $1,160,184. That's the circuit breaker offset for students that we reported last July for money that is coming in this year and for money that we're budgeting to offset the FY15. The other fairly large number there is the IDEA line, the very first line under grants, and that is the federal funding for special education. It's the only federal money that we get, or that any town in the Commonwealth gets for special education. So that's an 838,322, very similar number from one year to the next, and the other things are all smaller. That circuit breaker reimbursement, the $1,160,184, that is the number that's $383,000 bigger than it was last year. And so the fact that we have a greater offset from circuit breaker and that we have fewer out-of-district students budgeted for next year, and in fact, fewer as we speak, those are a big help. So we have total offsets for special education of over $2 million. So the real costs of special education are $2 million higher than what you see in this packet. With respect to regular education, we don't have any really large numbers there, but we do have the athletic fee, $244,000, and we have the middle school activity fee, and then various offsets from things like rental of our grounds and buildings that offset other sections of the budget. So these all offset a particular function of our budget. So that total number is $363,553, much smaller number than offsets for the special ed budget. So the total number of offsets, $2.6 million that are already reflected in the budget. I want to talk a bit about enrollment because that's a background and that's the thing we focused most on in the last several years. And we'll focus on it again this year, but we're also going to focus on some other things that I'll hit in a few minutes. So here's our overall enrollment growth from 2003 to through the projected start of school next year, which is the red bar. So you can see the ongoing growth. It's 665 kids over 11 years. It's about 60 kids a year, but not always exactly 60. In fact, in the coming year, we're looking for a much smaller growth, and you can see how the red bar is a little bit below the trend line. This slide is one that school people see every month because I do it every month. These are our elementary class sizes, and then the middle school and the high school up at the top in the corners. And I've put in some colors there to focus your attention on certain things. One is that our class sizes have come down a bit in the last several years, which is a good thing because we have added staff. We didn't add staff for the purpose of making class sizes smaller. We added staff for the purpose of allowing class groups to move forward. And in the bargain, we had some reduction in class size. But if you look at the blue numbers, those are areas where we're concerned. And actually, just today, I was working on the February 1 number, and we had 4 additional students with special needs that are here, preschool students that aren't on this chart because this is the December chart. And we had at Foster School, those kindergarten class sizes are all at 23 now, so there has been some change. But for the sake of making points about transitions, this is fine. So the blue are circled because those are things bigger than we want them to be, but not as big as they were a couple of years ago. Good thing. The red numbers, and there are 3 of the red numbers here, these are important because they're transition points. So if you look at grade 5, near the lower right-hand corner, 388 students. That's been a big class all the way along. They were a big class in kindergarten, now they're in grade 5, and you can see what's going to happen. 388 students are presumably moving on to the middle school to grade 6. We did make the assumption that maybe 20 of them will go off to private school. That's been a pattern, but that could be changing given that some private schools, particularly some parochial schools, are starting programs in grade 7, and we may lose kids in grade 7 rather than grade 6. We don't know. And then you can see the 342 students up in the upper left-hand corner, the 342 that are going from grade 8 over to grade 9. And we assume maybe 20, 25 of those kids would go off to private school. That's been a pattern of sorts. But if you look at 388 kids moving out of grade 5, or however many go, into grade 6, and you look at incoming kindergarten, which we've assumed to be 294 because that's what it was this year, you can see there'll be a big difference between kids leaving elementary and kids moving in, at least if we're right about the kindergarten prediction. And so that means the total number of elementary students will be less, actually, fewer kids than there are this year, we think. The other thing I want to mention is the green numbers, kindergarten and 1. I'll show you why in a minute, but these are 2 numbers that we have to watch very, very carefully. So if you take that projection model on the front, where we move groups along, we don't assume any in or out migration, yet that will happen, but this model simply moves all classes along except a projection for kindergarten, a projection that reflects a recent pattern of every year in kindergarten. We have 40 to 60 more kids entering grade 1 than we had in kindergarten. Those are 2 numbers that are really important. So if you try to quantify that model, you end up with a total projection for next year of 4203. That's that red bar on the previous bar graph. But you'll see that the total number in elementary school is down. At the middle school, the total number is up because of that big class coming in. And in the high school, the total number is up as well. And that, again, is without any in or out migration. So this is what has happened over the recent past as children move from kindergarten to grade 1. So this chart goes back to 2007, 2008, and continues through the year that we're in. So these are all real numbers, not projections. So you can see in the pink bar, the number in the middle of the pink bar is how many kids were actually in kindergarten. You can see the number in the green at the top. That's the number of children who joined that class between kindergarten and first grade. And you can see what happened. 11 kids more. Well, that was sort of typical of all the prior years. The next year it was 19 more children. Then in 2009-10, which was the year that we opened East School, it became 33 additional kids, then 38, then 50. And last year, in 12-13, it was 67 more children entered our first grade than were in our kindergarten. That's a hefty percentage of the class. And then this year, we thought maybe there'll be 67 or higher, and there were 48, still a significant bump up. So we don't yet have a sense of what that pattern is. It's an important one because once kids arrive here, they tend to stay with us throughout their career, so it's a really important number. On the other hand, this is the kindergarten. So what does this mean? So these are kindergarten classes starting in 06, 07 and continuing through the year that we're in. So we had that high of 343. That's the class that's 388 now in the 5th grade. And then there was a continued decline, which was projected with the formal forecasting that we had done back when we were doing the master plan. And all of a sudden, in 12-13, 256 kindergartners, and then this September comes along, and out of nowhere, we have 295 kindergarten students enrolled with us this year. So there are 40 or so more kids that have come. So now, what does that little upturn mean? You know, is it an anomaly? Something's just going to happen in one year, or is it the beginning of a pattern? And so we have to pay attention to that. So when we talk about so many variables in our process and in our need for resources, these are the kinds of things that are sometimes difficult to fathom. Once they get here, we know they're here, we provide for them, but how they get here, when they get here, what grade they enter are all unknowns. I'm not going to go through all of these. Ray mentioned the proposals and the categories in which the proposals for needs were addressed. Enrollment, other kinds of personnel or service needs, particularly facilities needs, which we'll talk more about, and other programs and improvements that we also need to provide. So there'll be a summary of how many FTEs that is. Now, not all of these needs are reflected in full-time equivalents in personnel, but many of them are, and there was interest in what that number would be. So the needs are here according to the sections of the budget. So all of these things are being proposed as needs, and they fit one of those 4 categories. I won't go through them all. You can take this along and study what they are, but there are 2 pages of them. And the total there is $894,220. The column to the left there that has a total of $1 million is a column that includes 2 other things that were asked for that we did not put in the budget. And so the $894,220 is the total amount of the needs-based proposals for being added to this budget. So you can take your time to go through those. I have other slides if anyone wants more information. Many of you had a copy of my budget message, and that actually has descriptions of what each one of those items is. It was summarized there. So in terms of the new FTEs, full-time equivalents, that are in that chart, the last 2 pages, there are a total there of 13.5, which would actually be new employees. And then there are some additions to existing staff. Someone who was teaching at 0.7, not full-time, would move to full-time, for example. Adjustment counselors, we have an adjustment counselor is 0.75, so the 0.25 there would be added on to her. And it's important, the reason that it's important to differentiate those is that obviously people who are adding FTEs aren't people that will get new benefits. So that's one important distinction. However, it's also important to note that over the last several years, the percentage of Hingham Public Schools employees who get benefits has ranged from 49% to 56%, and this year, in the year that we're in, percentage of Hingham Public Schools employees covered under health insurance is at 49%. There are some charts in here, which most of you haven't seen, that look at the budget and a proposed budget in a more graphic way. So here's a chart that divides the budget into 3 categories. One is personnel, and that's personnel in all categories. That's teachers and administrators and bus drivers and secretaries and all of those categories. And so you'll note that that's 82% of the budget. Only a few years ago, it was 79%, and then it went to 80 and 81. It's now 82% of the budget is personnel. The next biggest chunk is the reddish chunk, and that is contracts. And contracts could be tuitions that we pay for special education services. It could be things like the bus contract, various maintenance contracts, and so on. And then all of the other costs fall into a fairly small slice. So that small slice is textbooks and supplies and all kinds of other utilities, and all those other things fit in that little green piece of the pie. But the 2 big pieces are personnel and contracts, and in the contract category, the main piece, at least in terms of dollars, is the tuition out costs for special education children who are served outside the district. You can break the budget up, obviously, in lots of different categories. So here it's broken into functions, and functions are regular ed, which is about the blue half on the left, and then special ed. And the special ed here would include those tuition pieces. It's been around a quarter. Last year it went up to like 25% of our whole budget. This year it's down a bit because of that circuit breaker reimbursement and the fact that our budgets are net budgets. Here's special education. You can see the history there. You can see the fiscal year, and then the percent of the total operating budget that special education represents, and then circuit breaker. And circuit breaker only came along in the 3-4 year. And then the number at the bottom in the red, you can see this year coming up, it's only 22.4% of that budget, and that is because fewer kids tuitioned out and larger circuit breaker, which really reflects kids from 2 years ago. We can't apply for reimbursement even until they've completed a year of services with us. There's always some interest in what categories of needs children have. So we have the kids who are served in our district, which is the majority. We have 54 students right now projected to be, who are out of district right now, and we have 54, not necessarily the same 54, who are projected to be out of district next year. And those numbers can change daily, as you can imagine. So those are all the different categories. And if you're not sure about the colors, if you look at the bottom and you read across, so the autism is the darker blue on the left, and the reddish color is communication, and the green is developmental delay, and so on. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish between the different shades of green and blue and so on. So that big number there, the 175, is learning disabilities, specific learning disabilities. That's our biggest category in terms of the children who are educated here in our own schools in town. This is the out-of-district breakdown, and as you might imagine, it is different. Autism, 13 out of the 40-something students we have on the autism spectrum are educated outside. And again, if you read across the rows, you look over at the pink bar that has 20, that's multiple disabilities. We have a number of children, often very young children with multiple and complex disabilities, and that would be a major reason for being educated outside the district. Our special education enrollment, and that is enrollment right now. It's a 2014 snapshot, but again, can change every day. So you can see it by level on the left, and the numbers that say X plus Y, those are the in-district kids and the out-of-district kids. So preschool students, we have 34 of them. And then there are also peer model students, typical children who are tuitioned into that program. So we have a total of, right at the moment, we have 71 total kids in our preschool program. 34 of them have special needs. And then the elementary, there are 196 in our schools and 15 that are educated out in that age range and so on. So we have a total of 548 students who are in our building, the 54 out of the district, and a total of a little over 600 children with IEPs, or individualized education programs and plans, total 602. Out-of-district tuitions, we talk a lot about that, so it's important to have a sense of, where do kids go to school who are educated elsewhere, and you can see on the left-hand side, there can be private day schools or private residential schools. Other public schools, Situate, for example, Braintree, they have programs because they have low numbers of students in a certain category, and so they'll accept students from another district. And then children can be educated at a collaborative. Ours is socio-educational. 19 of our youngsters are there, and then 7 go to other collaboratives in the greater Boston area. And you can see the tuitions. If you look at residential, our biggest tuition is $220,575 a year. One child, 1 year. And then the range, you can see the collaboratives are a bit smaller. So this is just for your future reading, and I don't want to say enjoyment, because nobody likes to look at those big numbers in the context of But it does represent 54 youngsters who have services and have needs, and they are where they ought to be. There isn't anybody here that we don't think is where he or she ought to be. I think the argument over the years hasn't been whether or not kids need the services or whether or not they should be there. The discussion is always about should the state and federal government be paying more of the share of that. And hasn't been resolved yet, but we continue to work on that. You know, we talked about at the very beginning, the notion is there are other kinds of needs. We have children that come with social, emotional, mental health issues. We have families that are in crisis and so on. And so all of those kinds of needs, in addition to learning disabilities and learning needs, are part of our student services department. And Liz Flynn, who's back there, is the director of that department. So if you look at that department as a whole, you can see all of the different categories of people. There are the teachers in the department, there's the director, there's the clerical staff, there are elementary psychologists, team chairs, there's the early childhood coordinator, and so on. The green numbers on this chart are the things that are suggested to be new for this budget. And I want to say that it just isn't new, it's new in the budget. For example, we have an out-of-district coordinator now. It's a part-time person. We need a full-time person. We have limited flexibility when it's a part-time person who is on a contract as opposed to on a salary. So the out-of-district coordinator, on the right-hand side, 2700B, and the ABA specialist on the left-hand side are people we currently have, positions we currently have, but neither of them is full-time and neither of them is in a salaried position with the schools. They both are under contract. So we are proposing that they be added as new employees, even though the dollars, about half of the dollars for those positions will come from the IDEA grant. So if you look at the special ed budget in terms of a pie chart, you can see teaching services over $6 million, 61% of the budget, makes up 61% of that budget. And those are all the youngsters who are being served in-house in our schools each day. And then the other categories are counseling and psychological services, transportation, and we manage our transportation in a variety of ways. We have 9 vans that take youngsters to programs that are either in our own schools or nearby in a collaborative typically. And then we contract out through an RFP to bid out routes that may be a singleton route where perhaps there's only one child who's going to Watertown or wherever. And then we join together with the North River Collaborative that runs a bus kind of service where communities might get together and share transportation for children that are going to a similar place. So we manage all 3 of those. And then the big part of that budget is the purple, and that is the tuitions. We did include in here vocational tuitions, and you can see from the very first budget chart that's a small number, but it's such a small number, it wouldn't show up in a graph like this, and so that purple does include the vocational piece, but it's a very, very small piece of the pie. This year, the facilities needs really are something that we wanted to highlight. Those are things that we've had to kind of sacrifice over the years because as our enrollment was growing more rapidly than it is now, we had to address teachers in classrooms. But we can't continue to ignore things like our facilities things. So I'm going to get into that kind of part of the budget. This particular graph is the last 3 years, the projected year, and the 2 before that. And you can see the growth. If you look at the school committee and administration, that really is the people part of the budget that's up in the first number of functions, and that's blue all across the way there. And, you know, hasn't changed that much percentage-wise. If you look at the red, that's all of our health and student activities and athletics and all of those things. That also has grown a little bit, but not a significant amount. And if you look at the purple That's regular ed transportation. Again, that's grown a bit. For example, we added a bus this year, was in last year's budget. But it's been fairly stable. But if you look at the green, which is all of the facilities and operational things and utilities and all of those categories in the green, you can see that that is a more rapidly increasing number. Of course, in 2015, that's FY15, that's partly because we're opening a new middle school. And the new middle school is bigger in terms of square footage than the prior one, so there are additional needs there that are reflected either in utilities or need for custodians and so on. So that's the overall picture. If you look at the facilities and operations by category, electricity and heat and utilities and maintenance and custodial services, and you look at that over the 3 years, some of those categories are by their nature more costly than others, but you can see in each of those years, and in particular in 2014, electricity is higher, largely because of the new middle school. And this has happened every time we've opened a school, and any time towns open municipal buildings, there are codes that are more and more restrictive in terms of the air exchange. And in order to get air exchange, you have big fans that are often on the roof, and they use a lot of electricity. So that's kind of a phenomenon of new technology and new code in a number of categories. Utilities are actually a fairly small chunk with respect to those other categories. Heat, and we'll see this in a minute, you'll see a change there. The middle school currently is on oil heat, and the new school will be gas. So you'll see one of the budgets go down and the other go up. You know, there's a lot of talk about custodians. We've been concerned about whether or not we have the right number of custodians and what is the right number as we look at the middle school and so on. So it's always good to have some outside standard that one can use to compare. So here, the source that John used for this is the Association of Higher Education Facilities Officials. So it's not exactly the same population that we do, but they are in the education business, and they have come up with some numbers by which one might judge how many custodians it would be important to have. I guess I would argue that since we're dealing with not higher education, but K to 12, probably the cost should be even greater, because little kids are messier than big kids, and probably, you know, this is a good place to start, but likely we should be better than us. And we have not chosen these categories. They have. So if you look at the categories in terms of the standard, so we have orderly spotlessness. Well, that's showcase cleaning. And we like to think our buildings, so when you go in each morning, the floors are polished and the buildings are in good shape. But that would require one custodian for every 10,000 square feet. Now, our new middle school is 176,000 square feet, so just think about that. Level 2, ordinary tidiness. So that's when level at which cleaning should be maintained. That's kind of where we always want to be, kind of north of the middle in a lot of things, probably north of the middle here as well. And then it gets worse. Level 3 would be casual inattention, creative tidiness. So that's a lower level of cleanliness, in some places in the building actually becoming unacceptable. And level 4, moderate dinginess. That's kind of lacking what you might expect, normal cleanliness, and areas becoming unacceptable. And then, of course, no one wants to be unkempt, certainly not in your home or in your school, but generally dirty facility with cleaning accomplished at an unacceptable level. And, you know, one person trying to serve 50,000 square feet would apparently result in that kind of a label. And in terms of maintenance people, because this is talking about custodians, the 4 categories up above, but so maintenance people, you know, we have some maintenance people that are district-wide, not assigned to a particular building, but for every 50,000 square feet, one maintenance person is what's suggested here. So where do we stand? So John just did the high school and the middle school because they're the 2 biggest buildings, and they're the ones where we're proposing adding custodial help this year. So Our high school is 217,000 square feet. Our middle school has 176. This is the new school for next year. So if you look down at the bottom, FY14 is where we are now. We have 7.5 custodians at the high school, and we have 4.5 custodians at the middle school. All of our elementary schools have one-day custodian, and then 3 of the 4 have 3-night and 2-night, and 1, Plymouth River. Plymouth River has 2.5 custodians, the others have 3. One day and the others at night. So where do we want to be? We know we don't want to be at level 4 or 5, but where do we want to be? Well, if it's level 1, then that would mean we'd have to have 9.6 custodians at the high school and 7.8 at the middle school. If we want to be level 2, 8.7 at the high school and 7 at the middle would work. And level 3, if we're accepting of that, 7.2 and 5.9. So we're looking for 2 additional custodians for the middle school and 1 for the high school. And actually, the one for the high school is, we had a custodian position that we lost by attrition a couple of years ago, and so that would be getting us back to a number that we were at once. But the important thing is we need that role. And so we're proposing 8.5. So if you look at 8.5 in the high school column, that would put us somewhere between, what are those terms? Somewhere between ordinary tardiness and casual inattention, on the side of casual inattention. And at the middle school, if we are successful in getting 2 new custodians, then we have 6.5. 6.5 is in that same category between levels 2 and level 3. So, I think it's fair for people to ask the question, well, how do you know how many there should be? And maybe this isn't exactly the right standard, but I think it's important to know that we look for a standard. We looked at something that would give us a sense of whether or not we were making a reasonable request and whether or not we had a need, and we do think we have a need to be able to do better and do more. I won't go through all of these slides that follow because they're all about different kinds of utilities. Natural gas, remember I said that the middle school will go to gas rather than oil, so you can see the bump up in FY15. I'm assuming the down in FY12 was simply fewer degree days and a milder winter. Oil, now you can see there, if you look at FY15, the oil costs are down, again, largely because of the middle school. They're going off oil, coming onto gas. And you can see a similar downturn there in FY12, which does suggest that it's degree days and mild winter that was the thing there. The electric budget, I mentioned that. In every new building that we've either renovated or that is a new building, electricity always goes up, and it's largely a function. People think, so you have more computers. Well, computers don't draw that much electricity, but it very much is about the codes and the fans and the level of air exchange that you have to have. So that's not a surprise, but it's there.
Dot, if I could just add
Sure.
on that point, it would seem, while you're building a brand-new middle school that's supposed to be energy efficient, why wouldn't the numbers go down? Well, the fact of the matter is it's probably, I think the number is 23% more efficient than any ordinary building just built to current codes, and we expect to achieve LEED Silver certification as a result of that. But the fact of the matter is it's a building that's 30% larger than the current building. So just by sheer size alone, it's going to use more fuel. It's going to use more electric. So over time, it'll be more efficient than if we stayed with the current building, if that were an option. But just by sheer size, it's more costly to take care of.
Thank you. So if you then break down all of the facilities costs into custodial services, that's the kind of the aqua color, if you will, the bright blue is electricity, 14% of facilities for heat, 6% for utilities, and utilities would be things like water and phone, those sorts of things. And general maintenance, over $1 million. So we have focused on that because when we talk about need, everyone thinks enrollment. And that certainly does result in some needs, but it's more than that. It's other kinds of services and provisions. It's taking care of our property and so on. So we know that this level of increase, 4.92%, and the total dollars it represents is going to need to be reduced. We're hoping that some of that reduction can come through new information that we'll have about personnel. We don't expect anywhere near the number of leaves or retirements or resignations, but even some will allow us to reduce the bottom line. Special education, there are some tuitions that are quite high because some of the outer district schools ask for what's called extraordinary relief, and there's a division of the Department of Education called the Operational Services Division that has hearings and makes judgments on those requests. As part of the governor's budget request, and we don't know what will happen about that, there's a proposed piece of legislation that says to such schools, you have to live with what you're living with this year. Now, if that were passed and became the case for us, then there'd be a fairly significant reduction in our special ed tuition account, because we had to budget at where they said they wanted to be. And we don't know where that's going to end up, or if it ends up anywhere, but that's a possibility. State funding, Chapter 70, new legislation is what's referred to up above with the OSD comment. Offsets and revolving accounts, we'll go back again and look at our revolving accounts and see whether or not we can get some additional funding from those. Remember with our fields project that, our fields were out of operation, some of them, in the past year. And we'll need another season. 2 seasons actually grow in seasons, so perhaps not as much revenue will come into accounts like that. But as we look for ways that we can reduce the bottom line, that's a place that we obviously will look. We do have, on the other side, a potential new student that we just found out about the other day that we might have to add to the vocational budget. And we'll take a close review of every single function. So, that's the end. Thank you for being patient. But I really would like to speak to the people who are the decision makers. And those are the 3 boards. I don't have a decision. I have a recommendation, not a decision. So we have school committee, advisory committee here, and particularly the ed subcommittee that will recommend to its full body, and the selectmen. And so, we do, and I'm talking now from John and me, because this is the proposed budget from the administration at this point. So we do understand, we get it, that your task is a challenging one, and that we're not the only people that are needing resources. But we also believe that your decisions are guided largely by 2 factors. One is the amount of revenue that's deemed to be available for operating expenses, because that's what we're dealing with here for the coming year. Obviously, that's a big factor in your decision making. And the other is that we do understand, and we know that you struggle with making those decisions about how best to allocate the resources that are available in a fair and equitable way. And we respect that you care about being fair and equitable. So as this process moves forward, John and I do hope that you will consider the 2 opening slides that we started with about who we are and what we are as an entity, because we think they define the Hingham Public Schools as the unique entity that we believe it to be. And we hope that you'll consider how much is available and how to allocate equitably, and we hope you'll also think about who we are as a district and how we function. So, thank you for your attention. School committee is here. Ellen, Liz Flynn, John will all answer questions. We have lots and lots more slides if you're interested in seeing more slides, and certainly would start, I guess, with your attention.
Well, thank you, Dot. And I thank the school committee on behalf of all of the decision makers who are in the room. These kinds of analyses that you do with such due diligence are very much appreciated. I appreciate Dot's comments at the end in terms of the recommendations we'll have to make. Dot, I'd like to keep the questions brief because there's a lot of people who are going to be here tonight, and we're going to have a number of meetings going forward, and you've given us enough to digest, certainly. So I thank you for that. There was one number that just jumped off at me on the 8.5% regular educational increase, and it was $940,000 allowances for increases. It's on the bottom of the, it's not on your charts, it was a piece of paper that was given to us.
Right.
Maybe you could just say a little bit more about that for us, that would be helpful.
The allowance category.
Yeah.
Yes, well...
It's a different number from previous years, that's why I
Well, yes, it
get
is. Because last year, all of our contracts were in place for one additional year, except for the paraeducators. We still had to negotiate with them for a one-year extension of a contract. So last year, we had knowns. We knew exactly what our obligations were going to be contractually. So now, all of those contracts are expiring. We've already begun negotiations with the custodians, the bus drivers, and the other night with the teachers. And so there has to be an amount of money that we include somewhere in the budget that would allow that negotiations to go forward.
Okay, that's what you referenced earlier
Yes.
in the comments, okay. I'll practice what I preach. Irma, you're the school liaison. Do you have any questions? Or?
I want to thank Dr. Gallo, John Ferris, and the whole school committee, Ray Estes, and everybody, because if I try and rattle off the names, I'm going to miss somebody. It's a really good presentation, Doc. I had a couple questions, and I will make them short. On the enrollment projections.
Can we ask you to go to the mic?
Thank you, Dot. I should have mentioned that. Yes, anyone who has a question, please come up to the mic.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah?
Enrollments. On, when the shipyard came online, were there estimates for enrollments? And how did the estimates match to the actuals? And then my second question is, can you tell where the growth is coming by sector of town?
I have to think about that one. There were estimates. We had, as you know, two different demographic studies that actually were forecasts. I think what we do, simple projection from year to year, isn't a forecast. It's just taking known kids and moving them along. But we did have formal things done, and there were estimates, and they're pretty much on target for the shipyard. The shipyard tends to, because it's rental property for the most part, that families move in and out of there perhaps more frequently than people moving in and out to buy a house. So it's a more fluid population there, but 40 or 50 youngsters. The other thing about the shipyard that's unique, usually when people move into Hingham, and their children are young, and so the kids are all in elementary school, and then they grow. When the Conservatory Park first opened, in the first 2 years, we had a busload. All young kids, and they all went to Plymouth River. But at the shipyard, families move in and out for different reasons, and so it's more across the board. So it didn't hit one particular building. And the second question?
Dot, if I could just, I live in Conservatory. I don't have any kids.
And you didn't move in there, though, at the beginning.
But they were there.
But thank you for that, anyway. I'm sorry, Irma, I didn't get the other...
The growth by sector of town. Can you tell where the kids are coming from?
Well,
or is it everywhere?
Yes and no. For the younger kids, we start our kindergarten enrollment process every year by getting from Eileen McCracken a list of the births from 5 years ago, and so we certainly know where they come from because we have a name and an address. It's only about a 70 to 80% relationship with the kids who actually come to kindergarten for a bunch of reasons. Some people don't fill out census forms, and sometimes people move in just at the time the kids are entering school. But the part that's hard is when people migrate in and out, because when people buy property, we don't necessarily know whether or not they have children until they show up at the door. But each year, when we look at our new in and out migration, we have names and addresses, and they tend to be folks that are moving into a home that was occupied by somebody who was moving on, either out of town or more likely someone downsizing. So we don't have a lot of advanced knowledge of where that would be, but there are certain neighborhoods, and you can imagine people who live in Hingham all for a long time can imagine where there are more affordable starter homes, so to speak, and so we get larger numbers from those.
Two more, and then I'm done for now. I'll save my other ones. On the utilities, I'm glad you're addressing this, and I've talked to my peers in other towns where new schools have come online, and one of the comments from just about everybody I've talked to is as these new schools come online, they're very energy efficient, but the mechanics that run all of these energy efficient things, guess what? They run on electricity. So have you looked at the middle school to kind of forecast what we're going, and you don't have to answer, I'll go sit down. Have you looked at the middle school to forecast what we might be facing in terms of energy costs? And I'm assuming that we're putting in the most energy efficient windows and the most energy efficient everything. And then last question, on the fields, I'm very hopeful as you work through your field structure for paying that you're going to keep it attractive so our sports groups stay in town versus go off to other towns.
I'll mention that because we have a meeting actually coming up next week where we've invited all of the youth sports groups in. We invited them some time ago, and we found that they were very vocal about the fact that they want to play here rather than going out of town. And so the policy committee has been working on revising the fee structure that we put forward, and we hope that next week they'll find that more attractive.
Excellent.
With respect to the question about projecting, what John did for this budget was to look at our newest school, which would be most comparable to the middle school, and that was East School, and look at square footage costs there as a way of predicting. And we think that's a good way to predict until we've had a year of real experience.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that, so using East is a good baseline, but there are systems in the new middle school design that are even more efficient. For instance, the thermal panels that encase really the whole building on the interior. Those are designed to keep temperature so that even when boilers shut down to a low temperature at night, the rooms stay warmer so that it's not much of a fluctuation. So there are some technological advances that we hope will make it even more efficient. Certainly, a 5-6 year difference in design change can make a big difference.
Thank you.
So.
Mr. Healy?
Good evening, everyone. This is my first budget on the school committee. I will say, though, that my wife served on the school committee for 6 years, so we had a lot of spirited discussions along the way. I enjoyed talking to Jim Kirkcaldy. I don't know if he's still here,
He
but
is.
Hey, Jim. My wife and I met in European history, and our 5 children went through the school system taking European history. So I come from a slightly different perspective. I know that this is a money issue at the end of the day, but I've had the experience of going through the school system. I'm going to listen to my colleagues on the advisory committee, hear what they have to say, and I'll absorb this and say no more. Thank you very much.
Okay. Dot, there would be, last year was helpful to me, and I think to the people in town, if you could give us a summary of how we did in terms of colleges and applications. Carol gave some information out on the previous year's graduating class, and that's helpful because then people see where we're headed. So that would be good. And also, if I could request maybe estimate versus actual budgets through this year, that would be helpful to see where we're at and where are the potential areas.
Yep.
So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. McCune.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Dr. Gallo. I appreciate the time and effort that you and John put into the presentation. I don't have any questions myself, but I'm going to turn it over to the members of my committee, and I'm going to start with Laura Marwell, who's the chairman of our education subcommittee.
Thank you, and thanks again to the administration and the school committee for developing this budget proposal. As a member of the subcommittee, I've had a chance to listen in as this budget has been developed, and so a lot of my questions have been answered. So I'm beginning to think on a bigger perspective now as we take this budget and we incorporate it into the overall town forecast. And, you know, nothing is final yet. There's still a lot of moving parts, but we're looking now at a fairly significant deficit. And so the advisory committee is going to go back to our room, and we're going to look at all the different departmental budgets, and we are going to review what we've been presented, and we will probably have to make some difficult choices to ultimately recommend a balanced budget. In order to do that, it has been the advisory committee's practice to get an understanding of what a level services budget would be. And when I say that, I mean what resources it would require next year to deliver the same services that each department is delivering this year. And it's sort of a tool that we use to approach, as Dr. Gallo acknowledged, all the budgets fairly and equitably. We have talked about this, the school committee and the liaison team, and the school committee has felt it's been important to present a needs-based budget, and there's a lot of good information in here. But as we're at this stage of the budget process, I would ask again if the school committee would consider at this point preparing a document that would, which would categorize which parts of this proposed budget would qualify for level services and what parts would be additional needs.
We have talked about it at length. You know, we spent a lot of time as a committee talking about this issue, and when we started to approach the budget a little bit differently last year, in the end, we agreed on what actually I think the advisory committee came up with, or the subcommittee came up with, as a suggestion of what level services and then those items beyond level services represented. It's a little more difficult to do it this year, I think, and I think it's because of the way we've approached looking at the needs of the district. And I think the points that Dot made from the outset are very important to take to heart. I don't think it's possible to look at the school department in exactly the same way you look at the police department, or the Board of Health, or elder services, or any other department in town. If you look at the two largest or closest largest budgets comparatively to the school department, I think it would be the police department. It's only 10%. And the reason for that is a few of the things that Dot outlined and are included in some of the slides. 10 buildings, over 600 employees. That's more than 60% of the town's workforce. It's just impossible to look at us exactly the same way and hold us to the same standard. There are too many unknowns, too many variables, some of which Dot has spoken to tonight. And the types of needs and the way the needs evolve on a year-to-year basis, it's really difficult to categorize them and say, well, gee, you know, I could give you an example. So we're asking for some additional adjustment counselors. Those are needed to address an increased need based on a larger number of students who present with needs, and not only a larger number of students, but a wider variety and complexity of needs. And you and I have talked about this, and perhaps I don't disagree with you that the school department is not perhaps the appropriate department to deliver social services or health care services. But that's not up to us. The Commonwealth requires that we deliver those services. So, you know, I could argue that they fit into a mandate, and as a result of that, they should be funded, period, just like special education. A couple of years ago, when we started carving out special education services to highlight the large portion of the budget at that time, about 25%, increasing 10 to 11% year over year, you know, we did that to point out to folks, because I don't think a lot of folks really saw the enormity of it. Now, when we have a year where we've had some reductions in the special education budget, it only makes the regular education budget increase look higher. 8.5% on a year-to-year basis, I would agree, is not something that's sustainable, nor do I think we believe it's something that we would be expecting to try to sustain on a year-to-year basis. But just getting back to the adjustment counselors, we have more kids with more issues. To deliver the same level of services in that category, we need more adjustment counselors, period. I could go through all of the items that I think that are in the budget. There are very few, and they're very small dollar values that I would say do not maybe fit cleanly into what you might describe as level services. But at the end of the day, that's really not how we've chosen to approach this budget, and it's just too difficult, and I don't think is a valuable exercise for us to engage in. At the end of the day, we're all charged to determine how much money we have to spend and then to divide it up equally. You talked about making some hard choices. I hope that the suggestion is not that you'll go back to the drawing board and look at some of the other departments and suggest that maybe you have to cut from them in order to pay the school department. I don't think that'll be the case. I believe that there are additional revenues perhaps available that maybe haven't been looked at yet, haven't been discussed, haven't been reported. We're waiting for additional figures. I believe that we'll all be able to share appropriately. Everyone will be able to get a fair budget. And the choices perhaps won't be as hard as maybe you suggest.
Dr. Gallo, thank you very much. Question for you, as you look at the elements of this budget request, you've illustrated that this is a complex budget. There are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of different needs in different places. From your perspective, I'm curious whether there are some of these needs that in your mind are a higher priority than others.
They're all different, and the 4 categories of need are different. And so on the one hand, I can look at it and say the highest priority always has to be direct services to kids. So I put that hat on. And then I say, you know what, I don't want to say we've neglected our buildings, because in the end, we haven't always had the resources that were available. Capital is a perfect example that in order to take care of our buildings appropriately, we need capital funds, and every department has had to sacrifice in that area. So this year, if you could tell from tonight, we're really saying this is a need that we haven't been meeting, and we just have got to meet it. But it's going to be very hard for me to pick one of those 2 or any one of the 4. The end is that we know that we will not get all of this money. I think that's a given. And every day, I hope that I'll get that phone call or that email that will say, you know what, 2 more people are going to retire. Not that I want to lose any of our people, because we have great staff, we really do. But I look upon those things as ways that we can reduce the bottom line without having to make those tough choices about what's the most important.
And just to add a comment based on the previous discussion, I think the ultimate decision makers of this budget actually are not the people in this front row, it's town meeting. And I would just point out that I think what you heard Laura saying was also reflective of the way that town meeting, the decision makers and the folks who pay for all the services in town, have become accustomed to not only looking at budgets, but that's an expectation that they have as to how their advisory committee evaluates the budgets. So I would ask you to keep that in mind and reconsider that request. Thank you.
By the way, that was Mary Power. I would ask anybody else from the AdCom if they would just please introduce themselves before they speak. Thank you.
No, I'm not Mary Power. I'm Tom Piles, part of the advisory committee and part of the subcommittee that is going to be deliberating on this budget. And I just want to emphasize what Mary said. It may be the case that we aren't able to take care of all of the needs of the school department. And in light of the fact that we don't have feedback from a level services standpoint, we don't want to be acting in our own vacuum without some sort of feedback from you all, the school department, the school committee, on prioritizations. It isn't something that we don't ask other departments of, both from an operating standpoint and a capital standpoint. It'd be very helpful to hear from the school committee and the school administration when we get to that time when we have to make those terrible decisions, what are priorities that you need to have and what might be deferrable until next year.
I think that we, at least John and I, are prepared to make recommendations to the school committee. You know, I see our roles all as very different. Our role is to present the needs. This is what the school department needs. I see the advisory role as telling us what resources are available. I see the school committee role as setting some of those priorities as to how resources will be used. Last Thursday night, when the school committee met and we talked a bit about planning for tonight and what we should put forward, you know, it was my recommendation that the school committee isn't voting on a budget till the 24th. The selectmen aren't voting on a budget till the 27th. You're not voting on the budget, I think, until the 3rd. So my feeling is, let's not cut things now when there's still a month or more, you know, my optimistic hope, for changes. And then if we don't get changes that reduce the bottom line, and we have to reduce the bottom line, we certainly will make a recommendation. It may not be what you would call level services, because we struggle with what that means as opposed to needs. But if we have to prioritize among the many needs, we're prepared to do that.
Thank you.
And we will do that. But, you know, cutting things now when tomorrow some good thing could happen didn't make sense to us.
Yeah, if I could just follow that up just briefly, just 2 points. One, with respect to priorities, I mean, Dot's exactly right. You know, the school committee will take a hard look at this as we progress through the month of February and before we vote, scheduled for the 24th, about what makes sense and what is appropriate to do this year in the context of what the town can afford. But we'll work together with the administration on those curriculum priorities, those educational priorities. We'll certainly work with advisory on coming up with a number that's appropriate, that town meeting can support based on a recommendation. But it'll be the number that we work with, and we won't get into detail about the specifics of the curriculum and the educational services. And the other thing that I would mention is, you know, Mary makes a great point about town meeting being accustomed to a process and the way things are done and relying on advisory to make a recommendation and looking at the budgets based on level services. I understand that, but there's also the ability to look at something a little bit differently. And that's, I think, what we're asking you to do. We started to look at a process a little bit differently last year. We've spent a lot of time on this. We didn't just wake up one morning and say, you know what, let's just throw a wrench into the whole works and do it differently because we feel like it. We talked long and hard about it, we thought long and hard about it, and came up with the conclusion that this was the better way to approach it and made more sense for us. So I would suggest that, number one, we certainly will work with you to get to where we need to get so that you can recommend a budget the town meeting will find acceptable. But second, that I would ask you to have an open mind and be amenable to looking at something a little bit differently.
You know, I'll bring this home to a family. I'm the oldest of 8 children, as was my husband. I have one. But, you know, most of the people in this room are parents. And if you have a family and you have, let's say, 3 children, you certainly want to be fair and equitable to your children. But that doesn't look the same for every child. You know, if one child needs braces for $5,000, one way to look at it is to say, well, tough luck. I can't afford that, and I can't provide it for your brother and your sister. Another way to look at it, which is a little bizarre, is to say, to the child that doesn't need braces, you know what? I've got to give everybody the same resources, and so you're going to have to get braces even though you don't need them because your brother does. Now, I don't mean to make light of the situation that we're in, but fair and equitable, to me, isn't always the same percentage. Fair and equitable, to me, is that each child gets what that child needs. And I think that's what we do in our families, and we're asking you to think about that context and that definition of fair and equitable.
Hi, Jim Taylor, Advisory Committee and member of the Education Subcommittee. I've got two questions. The first is in your budget, and I know you don't want me to get into details, but I will just on this one topic. You've asked for, I believe, 2.7 additional personnel for the elementary education, yet you've presented that the proposed enrollment will be going down. Can you just get into that a little bit more, what your thought process is?
Yes, and I appreciate that you've asked that question because, yes, the elementary enrollment is going down. And I can honestly understand why someone would say, if we have fewer kids, how can you possibly say that you need 2.5 more teachers? But we move kids along in classroom groups. So if these 2,062 kids that we have now were all in the same grade and all in one building, we would not need the number of teachers that we have now. But when you split into 4 buildings and then you subdivide into 6 grades, kindergarten through grade 5, we need to move classes along. So if we don't add teachers, we're going to have to collapse somewhere. And that means class sizes will go up. Not all classes, but class sizes across a grade and a school for each person that we don't add. And I know that that's hard to visualize. That's why I like these charts. But, you know, if you have, for example, well, let's take the East School. So in East School, we have 4 classes going through the system, starting in kindergarten, and we have 4 classes coming out. That would seem to be fine. Teachers just move around, teach different grade levels. But given that we get, in the last 2 years, we've had 67 and 48 kids coming into grade 1, and they're not equal across the board. Suppose 15 kids move in between kindergarten and grade 1 this year. Can you absorb 15 more kids into kindergarten and have reasonable sizes, class sizes for grade 1 next year? I don't think so. So it's the moving of class groups along which is what jogs the elementary. It's not how secondary class sizes are built, but it's how we jog the elementary. Now, as we move into May, the first week in May, we make these decisions. We look at the number of kids, we look at the resources we have, we decide how many sections. It could be that we don't need an additional kindergarten. But given that we picked up 40 extra kids this year, we're concerned about that. And those 40 extra kids that we picked up in kindergarten may be added to with another 40 who join us between kindergarten and grade 1. So it's all about class groups. And if you don't have additional staff, then you have to compromise somewhere and a class group gets smaller. So, for example, in grade 3, look at grade 3 across the district, 356 kids. Look at grade 4 across the district. And if those classes grow even a little bit, just a little bit by in and out migration, and we tend to be more in than out, then we have potential problems there. That being said, right now, if I had to make some choices, I would have to say we have to look at that elementary classroom position thing. So talk about setting priorities. Right now, the custodians and maintenance men would have to take precedence over this because there's still some unknown in this number. There's no unknown in the number for custodians. And so those are the tough decisions we have to come to. Take each category one by one, and what are the knowns and what are the unknowns, and where we have more unknowns, we tend to be willing to take more risks.
Thank you. So I have more of a philosophical follow-up question, and that is, when we think about these budgets, we often think about them as we're making an investment in the department. Now, that may result in a measurable impact. If we add police officers, maybe the response times to calls will go down. So as I think about the educational budget, I think about, okay, how can we measure the impact that the investment we're making in the schools will have, and how can you measure that? So I know there's some ways, improved MCAS scores, or students getting into more select colleges, or the special ed students having more of a better outcome than they otherwise would have. How can you measure, or how do you think about measuring the impact of the investment, and as it relates to this budget, some of the areas that we're making investments in we may have otherwise not have done in the past?
Well, that's an interesting point, because that's a difference between putting in a new initiative as an improvement that you think is going to give you some added value, a smaller class size, children will learn to read at an earlier age, that kind of thing. When I look at this particular budget, and it is different this year, not because our process was different, but because our situation is different. So I look at this budget and say, these are all real needs. So it's not as easy as saying, if we put these things in, this will happen. My concern is, because these are needs, if we don't do these things, this will happen. There will be a negative. If we don't add teachers at both the elementary and the secondary level, then class sizes will be larger. That's not a good thing. So it's not so much, if we were putting forward a real new initiative, we'd like to try this, experiment. We'd like to pilot this program, because research tells us that this may result in some good thing educationally. But these are all things that we need just to stay where we are, and that if we don't do, can result in negative. And I honestly believe this budget is different in that way. I've been around a long time, as you know. I've done a lot of budgets, and this is actually my 14th budget as superintendent, and it is different. Usually when we talk about new initiatives, new things, they're the things that we would like to try. And this is not the same.
Thank you.
And Jim, just to follow up on that, so from a philosophical basis, you have a daughter in 5th grade. My son is also in the 5th grade, that large class at PRS. So back when they were in 2nd grade, your daughter was in a class of, I think, 28. So was my son. Laura, I know that your son's been in a large class at Foster. I think many of us have experienced that. You only get to be in 2nd grade once. Don't you want that experience to be as positive as it can be? And if it's a class size of 28 versus 22, chances are it may not be as positive as it otherwise could be, depending on who else is in the class, what the needs are, how the teacher can handle what the makeup of the class is, boys to girls. So in elementary, in particular, we focus on smaller class sizes, and that's why, in order to move them along, additional FTEs are sometimes necessary.
Since I've been on the subcommittee, I've been to a lot of budget meetings, and I've had a lot of questions answered. I'm going to defer to my other advisory committee members who haven't had the opportunity to ask questions.
But as Bruce pointed out, there are some things that we should share with you that are positive things, that are good things that are happening every day, and that are results of other budgets that have supported us. So we will get that information out.
Okay, Lizzie Eldridge from the Advisory Committee. As you know, I was on the subcommittee for 4 years, and just the last few years I have not been. But one thing, I, unfortunately, because of my work schedule, have not been able to attend a lot of the meetings, particularly the Saturday morning meeting. But so I apologize if this is sort of a more mundane question. But one thing that I have noticed over the last couple of years is that we no longer get the 2300 account details showing each actual teacher and what level they're at and what they teach and what they're, if they're full-time, they're one FTE or not. And I was wondering if, for those of us interested in the advisory committee, if we could get a copy of that. For me, coming from a science background and not a financial background, I find it much easier to start at the bottom, and I follow the trends, and I can look and compare. And that kind of data, for me, is really essential. So I was wondering if there'd be any possibility we could obtain that maybe from John in the next week or so we could look at that.
Well, you can get it for the year that we're in.
Yeah.
Because there is a budget book, and I think you probably have copies of it somewhere around, but that's public information. But it's a budget book for the current year.
Okay, so you won't have it for next year?
No, we don't produce that until after town meeting.
Okay, but we could get it for this year, is that right? So, okay, great, thanks. Another sort of more logistic question, but I know that I think I read somewhere that you aim for a class size of 22. And then when I looked at some of the information that was given to us, we oftentimes, if you take the overall look at the class sizes, we are below 22, or we're at 22.
Our average is right about at 22.
Right, yeah. Right. So, but if every classroom is going to have 22 or less, then we are going to have to significantly have a lower average, because you have the higher averages. And
we aren't trying to get to 22 in every classroom.
Okay, that was my question.
But we're trying to maintain that average across the district, and we're trying to avoid those real high swings.
Right. But why 22 in terms of, I think obviously 28 down to 22, that's probably a significant difference, but why not go for 15? Is there some kind of data that shows 22?
I'm only smiling, Lucy, because we had this conversation probably 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think we probably will never agree. I think elementary teachers would tell you, you know it when you see it. So there's research all over the place for class size, and there are not conclusive things. And there's not a lot of recent research about class size. But any of the teachers in the room, and there are a lot of elementary teachers here, could say to you, I know the difference between 22 and 28.
Okay.
When they're my room every day.
And is that what most of the other neighboring towns, do you know, do they?
I think they're all over the place. In fact, some of the smaller towns have smaller class sizes.
Okay.
For whatever reason, I don't know. But just, we're a moderate-sized town, for a suburban town, we're moderate to large size, but certainly people are looking for less than that, I would say, if you said, what is your goal?
Right, okay.
Our goal is, when we've asked for staffing, whether it be elementary or secondary, over the last several years, we have never come and said, we want this so that we will have smaller class sizes. We said we need it to maintain our ability to move groups forward. We need it to be sure that things that kids select at the high school have teachers in front of the class groups. Now, as you add a teacher, you may get the benefit of some reduction in class size across that grade level. But we have not come to you in the last several years saying we need teachers to reduce class size, per se.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just so I'm sure about something, when you go to hire a new elementary school teacher, they are two different categories, aren't they? It's like K through second or third grade.
There are different certifications, that's true.
So we can't move them around. If you hire somebody that's 3 through 5 or 6, I don't know how the classification works, but if
well, you can move them to some extent. You can move within those groups.
Oh, you can?
And some people have older certifications that allow them to teach the full range.
Okay, so there is some flexibility?
There's some flexibility.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
You probably can't take a 5th grade teacher and make a kindergarten teacher and that kind of thing.
Okay, great.
There is some flexibility.
And then I have just one last question, which is, again, sort of more of a, I don't know if it's a philosophical, but it might be more of a bird's-eye view. When we had that big economic fall in 2008, and we were all trying to figure out what we were going to do in the 2009 year, when we looked back, I think one of the things that at least I did, and I think some other people on the advisory committee at that time looked at, was that during our, what I call our fat years that we weren't having any economic issues, there was an awful lot of push to start new initiatives, to do new things, expand programs. And yet when we looked back, there had been less attention on maintaining or strengthening the infrastructure that we had in certain departments. And I don't know if Ted's still here, but we've had a few, over the last couple of years, sort of more lively discussions about now that maybe we are in a little bit better position, do you strengthen that infrastructure and to what extent? And I think Ted's take-home message is that those were the fat years, but they were not the wisest years, and we probably never can go back to that standard of living, if you want to call it, as a town. And I know in the municipal side of the budget decision-making, we have had discussions about that, and we are trying to work to keep each department going and maybe moving ahead, but yet keeping, what I want to say, our standard of living at a more basic level. And I was just wondering, given the expansion or the increased number of teachers or counselors that you want, how do you see the school department within that sort of perspective of having a quality product, but not necessarily living at the same standard that we did before in our years when things were financially very good?
Well, I'm not sure I remember those years that things were financially very
I'm
good.
sure probably never been
But, you know, I
so much,
think that I'm sure that it's a concern that because we, as a town, are in good shape financially and through a lot of hard work by a lot of people in a lot of departments, that there's perhaps the perception that, well, because we're in fine shape, we should just propose everything under the sun. But I think if you look at all of those things, certainly John and I, you know, we tell it like it is. And when we built this budget, we listened to the needs that were suggested by our administrators, our principals, our directors, and so on. We reflected on what we know, and we put forth the things that are needed. And then at the end, we look at the bottom line. We didn't start with saying, what can we ask for because there may be more money this year. That's just not how we operate. So I continue to say, and I know I'm saying it over and over, but I continue to believe that what we've put there are needs. Now, we may not be able to meet all of those needs, but those are not wants, they're needs.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Lizzie, just to follow up, you mentioned the word initiative, and I would say that there's virtually no new initiatives in this budget proposal. The only real initiative that I think we have in any aspect of our budget is in the capital budget, and that deals with technology. And we've met with capital on 2 occasions on that, and it involves addressing needs for new standardized testing and an overall district initiative that we're implementing over a multi-year period.
Daniel Dwyer, 6 Brewster Road. I'm on the advisory committee. Dr. Gallo, I'm curious about demographics, and I can see from the chart of the elementary school population that the big class moving through, if I'm calculating right, it would graduate high school in the spring of 2020. Is that right? 2021. Okay. Well.
There are 2 big classes in a row, the 4th grade and 5th grade.
380 and 381.
Yeah.
So I think the 388 would go through in 2020 and maybe the 380 in 2021. But as you said, this is not really forecasting. This is just
it's just moving
the bumps one space further down the road. In years past, we've seen some graphs that you had where you sort of track the school population to information more generally available about demographic trends. And my recollection was that they seemed to track fairly closely. What can you tell us about that? I don't recall from memory when there was going to be a peak year in that scenario, and then it was going to trail down.
Yeah, I think it was 17.
17 was a peak year.
Right.
All right, it looks like for you it might be later.
Yeah, it could be, but in the meantime, that projection, and, it only went out a 10-year period, so it's not clear what would happen. Typically, you want to do one of those forecasts every 10 or so years, and we're approaching that time. again. But what has happened is this bump up between K and 1 has just grown during the period since we've done that. And we don't know what that is going to mean. The kindergarten upturn this year was not something that showed up there.
Right.
So
I appreciate that. And I guess what I want to get to for a question is just that notwithstanding the changes, in the last 5 years or so, the first grade seems to be going down, the total population. And whether the kindergarten bump up this year is an anomaly or the first year in the beginning of a trend, we just can't know.
Right.
Okay. So
exactly, yeah.
if, for purposes of the question, if you could just assume that you're roughly going to track the demographic trends with school population, and that sometime between, say, 2017 and 2020, you'll hit your top, and then you'll start to tail down. What are you going to do in that circumstance about the budget? Because, and I'm talking about cutting, and I don't like to talk about cutting because I think it's not easy. You have to fight for the needs that you have, and I don't think we dispute that your needs. You have to fight for the needs that you have, but as difficult as it is, if we gave you everything in this budget, it's easier to add when the population's going up than it is to cut when the population's going down.
That's true.
But what can you say about the school? And I come from a family of teachers. It's painful to lay off teachers. One of my sisters is in Boston in one of the schools that's being taken over by the state. What are you going to do? What will your approach be when the population is down and you've got more teachers than you need, so to speak? What do you do?
There's always attrition, and in fact, what we did when we were in the tough times, the lean times, is we had to reduce budgets, not because enrollment was going down, but resources were not available, and we did that by attrition. And so we didn't fill positions. And that was how we got through a lot of tough times. So we would tend to do the same thing.
Right.
We didn't have to lay off nearly the number of folks that, the same number of people as represents the number of positions we had to cut. We did that by attrition. And I would hope that, this notion that there possibly is going to be a downturn that will keep on going, I don't think is realistic. If you look at, I have slides that go way, way back, and school enrollment is like the stock market. It goes up, and then it goes down, and then it goes up again, and then it goes down. And it's kind of generational. Families move into a town when their children are young, they go through the schools. At some point subsequent to that, they may downsize, a new family moves in, so you have that kind of stock market-y look. But whether it's either growth or decline, it tends to be a gradual enough thing that you don't have to, in a given year, lay off 5 teachers. But over a period of 5 years, you have enough attrition to take care of that.
Okay. I think just 2 other short remarks that probably best directed to Chairman Estes. First, I'd like to join with all of my colleagues who have said it's best to give us the level services figure plus additional requests. It's just a methodology. It's not that we won't listen to you on the merits of anything you want to convince us of. But it's the methodology that we've always used, not because we don't like to think of things in new ways, but because it works. It makes a lot of sense, and it helps with the prioritizing, even that Dr. Gallo and John Ferris are amenable to. And the last thing is that if you can tell us on the advisory committee where that extra money is coming from, we'd be very pleased to know.
Ted's in the back, and he might be able to share it with you. I'm not sure. Just real quickly on enrollment, and Liza worked on enrollment when we were working on the middle school project before it got started. That projected enrollment showed that there would be a decline, but that it would never go back to the numbers that we had before, such that you can expect there to be some decline and then leveling off over time, so that you're never going to have a wholesale dip or ever get back to a situation where I think we don't need the 4th elementary school, for example, things of that nature. So there's no data that suggests that at this point.
Yeah, I wasn't going
Yeah.
there. I just wanted to know generally what the policy was.
Our peak enrollment was in the late 70s, and we had 5,500 students in this district. And our low point was not that many years later. In 1991-92, we had 2,800 students. And so now we're at 4,300, 4,200 in the kids who are out of district. And I never thought it would get this high. I thought we'd level off, 3,800 students or so, but we're still continuing to grow. So.
Thank you. Mike Barclay, 11 Cottage Street. I've been listening to you present the budget, and this is something that I'd say to all the departments, but this is the first department that we've heard all the budgets so far, and this is the first department that's sort of premised their budget on where revenues might be. And one of the things that I think is very important for people to remember, when you look at our revenues, the new growth, the state aid, the local receipts, and where they are today, you can't necessarily extrapolate that they're just going to be there in the future. And we don't have to go too far back in time to see just how variable and volatile those can be. And so, and this is just a message as we continue to move through the next month and think about the budget and hope that maybe new revenues might be coming in from different sources. Right now, if you look at those three line items, they're about 20% of the revenues for the fiscal 2015 budget. And you just have to remember that, those can move around. And I think good budgeting, requires that you don't just budget for when times are good. Times are good now. When you look at those line items, they're up significantly over the last couple of years, but you do have to expect and think about the fact that they can go down. And we've seen that it's recent history. And I'm a parent of a foster fourth grader with 26 kids in his class. I'd love to see it at 20. And so I know what you're trying to do, but just be careful about premising a budget on revenues that we hope will come in, or that we hope will stay at a level that's higher than we know what they can be. Thank you.
I would say that as we approach the budget, I don't think we looked at it at all in terms of revenue. We looked at need. And, the only thing I can say to that is you folks all use the forecast as a tool. We all use the same tool. And right now, based on what we're seeing, and that's all of us in the room, the forecast for the next year and the next 2 years and 3 years and 4 years is all positive numbers, and that's a conservative forecast, okay? And it's never been positive like that. And so I understand exactly what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you at all. And I will tell you that we did not approach the formulation of this budget thinking about revenue. We approached it thinking about need.
Jim Sharkansky, member of the Advisory Board Committee. Just want to ask a simple question, very brief. In the schools, we have paraeducators as well as teachers' aides.
Well, paraeducators we're formally called teachers' aides. Yes.
Roughly how many there are?
130.
130. And at some point, they're in the classroom with the teacher, so they're not taking the place of the teacher, but at some point, they're aiding the teacher. So a class of, say, 25 is getting the benefit of a teacher and an aide or a para, and then if that student who needs the teacher's aide or paraeducator needs to leave the room for other additional education purposes, another class, what it might be, that teacher then has the result of a reduced class size for a period of time, certain days of the week or certain times of the day. So I'm just trying to understand, I hear the whole discussion of enrollment and trying to keep the class size as low as possible, but there is something to consider that we do have an additional adult in a lot of these classrooms that help with the size of the class.
It does in some ways, but important to remember, about 130 paraeducators is what they prefer to be called now. So we have 130 of those. About 80% of the 130 serve special education needs. The majority of those 80% are assigned to one or a small group of children. And often it's a child that needs that support, not just somebody nearby, but with the child. So it wouldn't be fair to say that all 130 are assigned to classrooms that then make a 2-to-1 ratio. So yes, there are times with teachers who are assigned, paras who are assigned for what we call inclusion classes, where they're there to help out in a general way. And so then I would agree with your statement. That happens more at the middle and the high school levels. But many of our elementary paraeducators are assigned for the needs of an individual child.
Lastly, just a comment, really simple. I stood in front of you, you're at the school committee, I think about 5 years ago, and asked that you, in tough economic times, try to be prudent with how the money is spent. And now that I sit on this committee and see the budgeting process and involved, I still echo that, and I kind of echo the sentiments of the people who spoke in front of me, where we'd like to see the services presented as a level services, and then your requests, has been spoken before. It's just a lot easier to understand and what is spent and done in a prudent manner. And thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a comment?
Good evening, Ted Joyce, 10 Hobart Street. This is my first year on advisory committee. And I'm just a quick background. So I bought my home in Hingham actually 14 years ago almost. I do not have any children, but I can tell you one of the first things that I looked at before coming to Hingham was the school system and what it offered to the community. So I think with that, I'd like to echo Bruce's request around, looking to see for what the town is investing in the school, where are our kids going to? I grew up in a Department of Defense school in the Republic of Panama. And I must have had the benefit of meeting both in terms of friends and children in the school here, and it far exceeds what I had growing up in either high school, junior high school, elementary. And I think also then, Doctor, I guess maybe I just switched to a question, maybe playing the worst case scenario of this, which is your budget for 2013 was $41,838,228. And this year, you're asking for an increase or a request of 4.92% increase over that. Hypothetically speaking, if the town, and I go back to Mary's point, that eventually the decision of the budget is made by all of us as neighbors and family members, if the town voted to give you the same budget that you had last year, don't worry about what level funding means, et cetera, would you qualify that as tough times? And then if so, what would be the first thing you would cut to keep within that budget? And I think for me that goes back to what I think you've heard several times from an advisory, which is it's hard to be able to kind of look through the budget and for us kind of be able to pick a priority for you. So if you could give us some direction of where that would go. So I guess I'm playing chicken little here, worst case scenario. If I give you last year's budget, is that a tough time? And is that something you'd be able to work with?
If you give us last year's budget, the dollars, and you look at our personnel costs alone, contractual costs, 82% of our budget is personnel, then it's worse than a tough time. It means cutting things. It's not a matter of what would we not add among the things that we're suggesting our needs. But if you were to give us the same dollars, that's a significant cut in our budget. I think to the worst case scenario, and what do you cut? Well, when 82% of the budget is in salaries, and we have to cut $400,000, $500,000, it almost has to come from salaries, because nothing else comes in big enough groups. And if you look at the budget and you look at that little piece of the other things, the chart that had the personnel and the special ed, and then there's this tiny little green slice that everything else. So we could take out that tiny little green slice, and we wouldn't get to $400,000 or $500,000. So it would have to be personnel and maybe all of the things that are there. There's just no other way to come up with those dollars.
Good. Thank you.
Just to clarify, in case somebody just tuned in, there's absolutely no scenario.
We understand that. We're confident of that, Greg.
But thank you to all the members of the advisory committee. I appreciate your time. And now just a couple of remarks. There's been some discussion about affordability and resources, and I think that's a valid point, but I think it's important to remember that the job of the advisory committee goes beyond just determining whether something's affordable or not. It's our job to recommend a balanced budget to town meeting that meets all the needs of all the citizens of the town across all the departments. And there are a number of priorities that need to be taken into consideration. And we're, one thing that concerns me is we are sitting on a lot of debt right now. Our debt service is approximately, I think, 10% of our operating budget. Our financial policy calls for it to be 7%. So we've got to address that gap. In addition, there is, I think, a desire on the part of a lot of people to provide some tax relief. The tax bills have gone up quite a bit over the last several years, in part to fund a lot of worthy and necessary projects. But again, there are people in this town who their tax bill is disproportionate to what they can afford. And I think we need to take that into consideration as well. So I just want to clarify, I think our responsibility goes beyond just affordability, and there's a certain degree of priority setting that needs to take place, and we intend to work with the school committee and the school department, as well as all the departments and the town administrator, to make sure, as we make those choices, that we make what we think are the right ones for the town.
I've never gone to town meeting without a budget that all three bodies supported. And certainly, we would hope that that can be where we are this year as well.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. I thank you all for your attention to this evening. I thank, again, Dr. Gallo and Ray for their thoughts and comments to give us the input that we all need in the next month ahead. And I can assure you we will be getting together again soon. The Board of Selectmen needs to take a vote now to go into executive session to discuss a strategy with respect to real estate negotiations, because discussion in open session may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the town. Do I have such a motion? All those in favor, aye. Mr. Healy, aye. Ms. Lauder, aye. Mr. Rebuffo, aye. Thank you.
AdCom will reconvene upstairs. Thanks, Ray.